Right, wakey, wakey. That was just a Lego head laying out the Labour Party's brand new policy for making sure that they can stop the boats crossing the channel. They're going to use anti-terrorism legislation and deploy MI5 to combat the channel migrant crisis. Will it work? Well, let's ask none other than Matthew Laza, who definitely has a viewpoint on that. So Keir Starmer there saying that the Rwanda plan is gesture politics. Well, you know, I have sympathy with him. I always said the minute that policy was announced, it was back of a fag packet nonsense. But even I'm beginning to convert to the idea that it might be somewhat of a deterrent, because they're all going from Northern Ireland into the Republic of Ireland. So in some sort of perhaps unintended consequence, it's not stopping the boats crossing the channel, but it is sort of creating an onwards passage back to the EU.
But it's not solving the problem, and that's what Keir's setting out this morning, is a detailed plan drawing on his experience as Britain's chief prosecutor and the experience that the last Labour government did after 7/7, in particular, when it set up this coordinated anti-terror unit. So using that model to set up a coordinated high-level force to really clamp down on the gangs. And yes, as you said earlier in your introduction, it's not easy. I don't think anybody's pretending that you can wave a magic wand, unlike the government which thinks Rwanda is a magic wand, when at the moment, let's remind ourselves, nobody's gone to Rwanda forcibly, one person's gone voluntarily, and it's £3 million a pop to send somebody to Rwanda at the moment. So that's what this... And so he's been going through this morning in the detail of how that would work, how it would bring the agencies together, and how we would use anti-terror legislation.
What is fascinating about this is I've been saying for a long time, you know, good old Alex, always ahead of the curve.
Absolutely.
I've been saying for a long time, what's interesting in Belgium is they seize the mobile phones of the people about to board the boats, and then using those mobile phones, they can track it back to the people organising it all and pinch the person in charge. And as a result, very few boats are now leaving from Belgium, and that is using anti-terror legislation, which is what Sir Keir Starmer
Absolutely, you got it. You give my answer.
So I say, well done. A round of applause on that. It also enables him to be able to raid homes of suspects and detain people for questioning without needing to bail them, so they can then abscond back to Kurdistan or from whence they came. And so I think, well, yes, in part, I find it incredulous that this isn't happening already.
Alex, why isn't the government doing it?
Why aren't they doing it? But what I do think, though, is it's, you know, the thought that this is necessary, this needs to happen. So I'm glad that someone is putting this forward. It's absolutely nonsensical that we're not using such legal powers, or putting legal powers in place to really crack down on the criminality of the migrant crossings. But I can't see how this is necessarily going to work internationally when we know that it's a huge global chain. You've got Wagner mercenaries kicking up dissent in African regimes, earning money from trafficking people and creating the mass exodus of African migrants over to places like Lampedusa. We've got EU open borders where they're able to move undetected across a continent. We're supposed to be giving the French a load of money and using facilities in Interpol, Europol, the lot of it, the world coming together to tackle this. I mean, you see what's happening in America as well. It's not a UK problem, it's the entire Western world. And what I didn't understand, and I want your views on this, is Sir Keir Starmer said that these ruthless people traffickers abuse cracks between our institutions in order to ply their trade. Now, I don't think they're using cracks in our institutions. I would say they are using the sort of spineless, lily-livered nature of our institutions, knowing full well that under sort of EU mandate, not EU mandate, a UN mandate, ECHR, human rights and all the rest of it, that the simplest way of stopping this would be to push the boats back or turn them around and take them back from whence they came. But it's these very institutions that enshrine in international legislation the fact that that becomes very difficult to do.
Well, I mean, clearly there are some international commitments. There's also the issue of the English. It's not just the legal situation in the English Channel in terms of physically turning back the boats. It's also the issue of you doing it in the world's busiest shipping lane. But I mean, what I think he's talking about in particular is making sure that these institutions are less lily-livered. So one thing he's talked about this morning is using serious crime prevention orders, which mean, as you say, that you can do things with reasonable suspicion. You don't have to. You can do pre-arrest stuff. You can stop people. You can do pre-arrest detention, etc. Which is all the weapons that were deployed against terrorism. And it's just insanity that they haven't been deployed yet by the government. So yes, I mean, you know, I don't believe the ECHR is ultimately the problem, but, you know, some people may say leaving the ECHR is the only answer. I don't think it is the only answer, because you can really crack down. For example, I mean, you're absolutely right about the international trail and how it goes back across continents, but one of the things we need to do is physically stop the trail of boats, because there's a kind of idea that people just kind of, you know, go to the sort of the bucket and spade shop
Decathlon or whatever and buy a dinghy.
No, Decathlon and buy a dinghy. That's not the case. They're actually kind of imported on an industrial scale.
They're being made specifically in China.
Exactly, and then they come right across 30 countries to get there, right, including European countries. So it's things like literally, cracking down, stopping that trail of the boats coming.
That's my problem. Is very limited as to what he can do if he becomes the next Prime Minister of the United Kingdom to make other countries crack down on their bit in the puzzle, to take charge of their sort of.
But I'm so glad you mentioned Belgium, Alex, because you and I literally are. I think we're both obsessed with Belgium, because
are we?
Yes, certainly when it comes to what they're doing, because what we've got at the moment is a situation whereby people arrive on the shores of Dover, their phones remain with them, and they start making TikToks.
I know.
And somebody said to me yesterday, "Oh, they're just going to throw them overboard." No, they're not, because they're making TikToks, and crucially, they want their phone when they're here, because those who are ne'er-do-wells amongst them want to get involved in the networks, and the people who have, you know, the people smugglers who may be doing indentured labour for, etc. They need to get in touch with. What Belgium's done is basically it's had huge success in taking phones off people and using that phone to track back and the gangs. It's not a magic wand. It will take concerted action, but included in this is not just Britain using anti-terror legislation and bringing British agencies together, but it's actually working. It's having a new cross-border police force and putting them in there. It's not going to. There is no magic wand, as you say, on this issue, but it's real nitty-gritty stuff. Rwanda's a gimmick.
This all depends, really, as well. If we're going to employ sort of a proper spot checks and cross-border legislation to be able to crack down on the criminal gangs, then I'm afraid the EU's going to have to put up borders. It's going. How else are you supposed to find?
Well,
these
you are
people?
seeing increased checks.
Because otherwise, if there are no checks at borders, how do these spot checks happen? How do you say, oh look, there's a lorry with about 15 giant dinghies in the back of it? You know, if they
can do that, Alex. Absolutely, and they are now doing that in certain places. So you can keep the principle of free movement within the EU. Obviously, that's not including us, but you can do spot checks. You particularly border hotspots where people are coming over. At the moment, we're writing this check just to the French. The French are just taking the you-know-what and not doing very much. I mean, you and I, you're just about old enough to remember, I'm certainly old enough to remember, we had the Sangat migrant camp in northern France, which David Blunkett, absolutely, who we've spoken about before, who is a great guy, and David Blunkett did a deal with the French, and that got the Sangat migrant camp was closed, and effectively the equivalent of the jungle, as they call it in Calais now, was closed. So there was really detailed hard work you can do. But yes, it's going to take action, not just by us, but by our European partners. I hope that a Labour government will be a restart with our European partners. But I also think, as you know, actually because of the political situation in Europe, attitudes are changing. So you've seen more border checks already. And also the EU's doing lots of stuff in North Africa to try and stop people never leaving Tunisia, etc. which they do. Look, we don't know if that's going to work, but at least there's new. Well, it includes offshore processing, which is a big thing, which the Germans, as you know, were blocking for years and years. The German government has now, the SPD, the Labour Party in Germany, has actually persuaded the lily-livered Greens and the Liberals in the coalition that they need to do this because it's going to take concerted action. But the problem is the government cannot pretend. So, you know, Keir's there today has got border security as his logo on his lectern. What he hasn't got is the three words "stop the boats," because yes, that is involved stopping the boats, but you can't pretend to people that you can wave that magic wand, because that's what breeds cynicism. And with Natalie Elphicke, of course, the Dover MP, she has that cynicism every day from her constituents who are coming to her saying, look, you know, the government says it's going to stop the boats. Rishi Sunak has that behind him every time I see him on the telly, but the boats are still coming.
Exactly. It does. It's pretty clunky, to say the least. Matthew, thank you so much. So much to catch up on. We're taking a short break now. Keir Starmer really ate into the top of my programme, but very important announcement there by Labour. Remember, we are coming up to a general election, of course, so it's important to hear what various people's policies are going to be, and this one's so important on the doorsteps when you ask people what it is that they want to see happen in the UK. So many people saying we must stop the boat. So there you are. So Keir Starmer laying out what he would do